Hey, it is Friday the 13th, and before I get murdered by Jason, I'm going to record a video in class showing some examples from our lessons and a couple things I just wanted to cover to make sure everybody knows what's going on. Let me start with a line. Well, I've got to get my cursor in there. Print, and I'm going to say int 50 plus int 50. What's going to happen when I hit run? What's going to print? 100. That is correct. It's not a trick. Now, what if I change it to str50 and str50? What's going to happen when I hit run? Yes, it's going to say 5, 0, 5, 0 squished together. It's going to do a different thing for the plus. Okay, the plus here didn't change, but it's actually a totally different operation. When it was plus integers, it was doing addition. But when it's plus strings, it's doing a thing that you may have seen in some error messages. You guys know what I'm talking about? A word that starts with C. It's a word you would also encounter a lot if you do any spreadsheet nonsense. It's a word called concatenate. Concatenate means take a string, take another string, squish them together. So, for example, if I put one string and one int, it would probably give an error message that says, hey, we can't concatenate. Yeah, okay. That is because one of these is in math land, it's the value 50. One of these is in string land, it's the character 5 and the character 0, and it doesn't know anything about the value 50. Okay, this guy, it's just a number. It's like Roman numerals would call it an L, or binary would call it a 32 and a 16 and a 2, a 11010. Those are all different names for the same thing. The value, you know, it's what it has in its heart, is different than the names it might use. That which we call a rose would by any other name smell as sweet. That's key, and a lot of the errors you guys have been getting are just that issue. So let's look at one in practice. 4.3 is the one that's been like getting a bunch of people saying, oh, I'm not sure, why is it not working? Let's go to the last one, the transaction, because it says it's a challenge. And I'm going to delete the code that's there, and we'll write it on our own, making sure we know what's what. So this is actually one that I typed earlier, but I'm going to delete it and we'll do it again. Assignment. You've been hired to help a bank. It's going to tell us to start with a balance. If they deposit, we take an amount and add it to the balance. If they withdraw, we take an amount and subtract it from the balance. If they withdraw too much, we say, hey, you can't have negative. And if they say something else, we say, hey, try again. Or not try again because we haven't done the loop stuff yet, but we say, hey, that's not good. So let's start off with balance is 1,000. Now, when I do that, Python assumes that this is what I mean, and they're correct. But if I wanted to make sure, I could say that, okay? If I wanted to just not leave it up to chance. But if you type some numbers, they're going to assume you mean an integer. Now, Python has code that we don't see about an integer class and all the properties of an integer and all the functions that can be done on it and all the things you can look up like, oh, you know, is it positive or negative or whatever. We're not going to see that unless you Google the documentation and stuff. But there is a lot going on behind the scenes. So now when we say, do you want to make a deposit or withdraw? Let's get that. So I'm going to call that action because that makes sense to me. You could call it something else. Action equals input. Would you like to make a deposit or a withdrawal? Make sure to type exactly, because this is not going to be robust. You know, if they type deposit with a capital D, it's not going to work, because we're making it really, really simple. Are they typing exactly one thing or exactly another thing? Later, we'll get better, and we'll make it accept a couple different versions, or we might even give them just 2 buttons to click, you know. But at the beginning, we're keeping it simple. And then how much? So amount equals input how, trying to capital, how much would you like to, and then we can't say deposit or withdrawal because it might be either one. So how about we say plus action? That's not perfect, but we'll stick with it for now. So we say, what do you want to do and how much? And then we got to do it. So if they said deposit, no, if action equals deposit, then some stuff's going to happen. If action, we'll fill in then later, of course. If action equals withdrawal, then some stuff's going to happen. And else, meaning they did a typo, they put another word, whatever, then we're going to say they give us the exact text here. We say invalid transaction. Okay. Now, after that, it's going to do a check for negative. If they try to withdraw 1,000,000 and they only have 1,000, it's going to say you can't do that. And it asked us to make a separate thing. More likely, you'd want to put that inside the withdrawal chunk because that's the only time it matters. But right now, we'll make a separate little guy for that. And we'll say something like we'll save that. We'll save that for later. Okay. So balance is 1,000. We know what we're going to do, and then we're going to do something with it. So if action equals deposit, then we're going to say balance is balance plus amount. Okay. And this right away gets us to some interesting stuff, because the equals in this line is not the same thing as the equals in math class, because these two things aren't equal, right? Balance does not equal balance plus amount unless amount is 0. If this was in math class, we could say, aha, well, we could cancel out these, therefore amount must be 0. But that's not what it means. What does it mean when we say equals in this case? Nobody's even looking at me. That's okay. What it means is we're going to take the stuff on the right and do anything we need to do to figure out what it is, and then assign that to the stuff on the left. So when we said balance equals 1,000 over here, we say, hey, 1,000 is going to go in a slot in memory labeled balance. It's like putting it in a drawer or something. And whenever we open the drawer called balance, we see, oh, it's 1,000. Okay. That doesn't only happen when you create the variable. You could do it later. You could say balance equals something else, and it will assign that into the drawer. So you could say balance plus amount and then put it in that spot. So when we say balance 1,000 plus amount, whatever that was, add it up, then assign it to the same word. Now, it's not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Or what were you going to say?
I was just going to ask since you have two spots where balance is, I guess, changing its definition, if you put balance again out of the else statement, would it go back to its original value or the one that you changed in the if statement?
Good question. There's only one balance. So like that spot in memory, that variable, is not holding like temporary version. It's not like, oh, well, I would be this or I would be this. It's always just one thing. So if this line happens, it wipes out the previous one. If it doesn't happen because the action is not deposit, then this line never happens. Later, once we get good, we're going to complicate that, right? Like we might keep a variable called balance and then keep another variable called new balance that's like what it would be if this transaction finishes, but we might check a few things before it's finished. But for now, we're just wipe out the old one, put in the new one. However, there's one more thing I want to add to this, because in code like this, you have a million versions of this action where you have your thing and you add a little bit to it, or you have your thing and you take off a little bit to it. For example, if you had a counter variable that's like counting how many times you do something, and it's like counter plus one, counter plus one. People ended up typing lines like this a zillion times, and they said, let's make it a little bit shorter. So there's a way to make this a little bit shorter, which is instead of typing a thing twice, you can say balance plus equals amount. So the action plus equal says, hey, we're going to take what it is and then add on this stuff without having to like name the thing twice and use it in a weird way. So this is cool. You don't have to do it, but it's cool and it saves time. Which means on the other one, we're going to do the same thing, right? Minus equals amount. And then after you go through this block, balance might have changed or it might not have, but there's only one answer to what balance is. If it changed based on one of these, then it totally forgets about the 1,000 and it never, tracks that. If we were making a good bank program, then we'd want it to track that. We want it to have like a history, but currently it doesn't. So let's see. The next thing says if else you can't have negative. I'd like to do that inside the withdrawal because that's the only time you need it. If they say deposit, we never need to check for a negative balance. Or do we? What if they put deposit negative $1 million? We never checked. So maybe we'll keep it outside for now. If we make a really healthy, robust version later, it will check for these things. But so far we haven't. Okay, so let's just say if balance is less than 0, something's going on. Print, you cannot have a negative balance. Else print final balance is balance. No, get those quotation marks out of here. Oh, okay. And then this is a value. It's in math land. We need to have it put on some clothes so it can go out into the world. So we're going to put str. And this would work. I'm going to change one thing, which is on these, they're all tiny little baby lines. So I'm going to remove the indentation because it looks weird to me. You can keep it. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to have these as one-liners because it looks prettier to me. Oh, and this is going to be elif because in this block, if it does deposit, it doesn't need to check for the other ones because it's never going to do both. Or if it does withdrawal, it doesn't need to check for the final one. So you want to make these like branches of a flow chart as opposed to separate things. So let's go to the output and make sure it works the way we think it works. we're going to say, okay, that looks horrible, right? The line is cutting off and blah, blah, blah. So first I want to make a space so that our cursor is not right next to the exactly. And then we should probably do something like add in a little carriage return, you know, like a new line thing, but that's fine, whatever. Let's start over. Let's say deposit, and how much? Let's say $345. Oh, it doesn't like it. The types. This guy needs to be an integer because when I put 345, it was counting it as the character 3 and the character 4 and the character 5 instead of the amount that we might call 345, or we might call other things in Roman numerals or in binary or in Babylonian numbers or anything else. So now let's try it again. Deposit, boom, and that worked. Let's say withdrawal, and that worked. Now let's do one where it actually ends up with a final amount. Withdrawal. I know that looks dumb. We're going to fix that eventually. How much would you like to withdraw? 23, and we have 977. So currently this worked for depositing a normal amount, withdrawing a normal amount, and withdrawing too much because it told us we can't have negative. Now again, this doesn't really fully work because once it gets to this point and it says you can't have negative, it's already deleted the old balance, so we wouldn't be able to go back. So this would like mess up the storage of your withdrawal. What it should have is like, if it would have made you below 0, then you say that and then don't change balance at all. But since they put it at the end and we were writing it in order, we're going to stick with this ugly version for just now. Let's go to test cases and see what they say. Whenever I have somebody stuck on one part, I tell them to go to test cases, and it'll give you like each criterion separately. And hey, it worked. So they tested 50 withdrawal and they got 950. They tested drawing a lot and they got the right amount. They tested something else and they tested 150 deposit and they got all their, you know, everything that made them happy. Again, when I was looking at this, I wasn't happy. I was saying, wait a minute, what if they type something wrong? We should loop back and ask them to do it again. What if they go to negative? We should go back to the previous balance and not keep the new one because that didn't really happen. You know, all this stuff. But for now, this does work as a basic answer to the question, you know. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments about this one? Okay. I'm going to stop the recording because it's getting long. I don't want to make a super massive video. But in class, I'll continue to help people throw up examples, get the ideas flowing. And if you're at home working on this, you can always email or post a comment on Google Classroom. Thanks.